Have you ever been called a burden by the people who should love you unconditionally just because of who you love? That question hit me like a freight train the night my father slammed the door in my face. I was 23, standing on the porch of our modest house in suburban Ohio, the same porch where I once learned to ride a bike and where my mother hung Christmas lights every December. "You're nothing but a disappointment, Aiden," he'd said, his voice low and final. "This family doesn't need another problem." The word gay hadn't even left his mouth that time, but it hung in the air thicker than the summer humidity. I packed 2 suitcases and left before dawn, driving east toward Chicago with nothing but a half-finished business degree and a heart that felt permanently cracked. The city swallowed me whole. I found a cramped studio in Lincoln Park, took a job as a junior financial analyst, and learned to smile through the ache. Nights were the worst. I would sit by the window watching the L train rattle past and wonder if I would ever stop feeling like the extra weight dragging everyone down. My mother texted once a week, short messages that said, "I love you," without ever mentioning Dad. My younger brother, Tyler, sent memes and nothing else. Silence from the rest of the family spoke louder than any argument. Then Ethan walked into my life at a quiet networking event downtown. He was 30, a corporate lawyer with sharp blue eyes and a laugh that made the room feel lighter. We talked about everything except the things that hurt. He told me about growing up in California, about losing his own father young, about building a life on his own terms. I told him about spreadsheets and projections, about the safety I found in numbers. By the end of the night, we exchanged numbers, and within a month, we were sharing late-night coffees and long walks along the lake. He never pushed. He just listened when I finally whispered, "My family thinks I'm the reason everything went wrong." Ethan squeezed my hand and said, "Then maybe it's time to rewrite the story." I didn't believe him yet. The label burden had burrowed so deep I carried it like a scar I couldn't hide. At work I excelled, earning a promotion faster than anyone expected. I sent money home anonymously through my mother, enough to cover Tyler's college books and the rising property taxes. No one knew it was me. I told myself that was enough. But Ethan saw through the walls I built. "You're allowed to want more than survival, Aiden," he said one rainy evening as we sat on my tiny balcony. "You're allowed to be loved without conditions." I wanted to believe him. I just didn't know how. The first crack in my armor came with a phone call I never expected. It was my mother, voice trembling. "Your father's business is failing, Aiden. The auto shop, the bank, is threatening foreclosure. We're losing everything." I stared at the city lights and felt the old weight settle heavier on my shoulders. The same family that had pushed me away now needed me. I hung up without promising anything, but the question wouldn't leave me alone. What if the gay son they branded a burden became the only one who could save them all? I booked a flight home the next morning, heart pounding with fear and something dangerously close to hope. The drive from Chicago to our small Ohio town felt longer than the 4 hours on the map. I kept replaying Ethan's last words before I left. "Call me when you need me." No matter what. I hadn't told him the full truth about why I was going back. Part of me still believed that revealing the extent of my family's rejection would make him see me differently. So I drove alone, windows down, letting the Midwest wind carry away some of the dread. Pulling into the driveway at dusk, I saw the familiar peeling paint on the garage and the "for sale" sign my mother had tried to hide behind the bushes. Dad was inside the shop, tools scattered like casualties of a war he was losing. When he looked up and saw me, his face tightened, but he didn't turn away. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice rough from years of shouting at engines and, lately, at life. "I heard about the shop," I said simply. "Thought maybe I could help look at the books." He snorted, but there was no fight left in it. Mom hugged me, so tight I could feel her relief through the fabric of my shirt. Tyler, now 19 and taller than me, punched my shoulder and muttered, "Good to see you, man." The house smelled the same, coffee and motor oil, and for one fragile moment, I let myself remember what it felt like to belong here. That night, I spread the shop's financial statements across the kitchen table. The numbers didn't lie. Years of declining customers, rising costs, one bad loan after another. Dad had kept the doors open on pride alone. I worked through the night, highlighting what could be cut, what could be restructured. When Mom brought me coffee at 3 a.m., she whispered, "Your father won't say it, but he's scared." We all are. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The old label echoed in my head, but for the first time it felt lighter. Maybe I wasn't the problem. Maybe I was the solution they hadn't known they needed. Ethan called the next afternoon. I stepped outside to answer, the autumn leaves crunching under my sneakers. "How's it going?" he asked, voice warm across the miles. I told him the truth this time. The failing business, the silent tension, the way Dad still couldn't look me in the eye. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Send me the loan docs. I'll review them pro bono. And Aiden, you don't have to carry this alone." His words cracked something open inside me. For the first time since leaving home, I felt seen, not as a burden, but as someone worth fighting for. The following week became a blur of meetings with bankers and suppliers. I used every connection I'd built in Chicago, negotiating payment plans and securing a small bridge loan. Tyler started helping in the shop after classes, and slowly Dad began listening to my suggestions. One evening, he even sat at the table while I explained a new marketing plan. "You always were good with numbers," he admitted gruffly. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd gotten in years. Mom watched us with quiet tears, and I realized the family I thought had written me off was still waiting for me to come back in my own way. Yet the secret I still carried pressed harder every day. Ethan's name stayed off my lips. When Mom asked if I was seeing anyone, I changed the subject. The fear of rejection all over again kept me silent. Ethan noticed the distance in our calls. "I'm here when you're ready," he said gently. I wanted to be ready. I just didn't know if my family could handle both the savior and the gay son in the same breath. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Ohio in a quiet white that muffled arguments and gave us time to breathe. The shop's numbers started climbing, small at first, then steady. New customers trickled in after I redesigned the website and launched targeted local ads. Dad even smiled once when a regular praised the updated service schedule I'd implemented. But the progress came with new fractures. Tyler confided in me one night that he'd been struggling with his own identity, quietly dating a boy from his college class. "I didn't want to add more weight," he said, echoing the very words I'd heard from Dad years ago. Hearing my little brother carry the same fear I once did broke something in me. I hugged him and promised he'd never have to hide here again. The real test came when the bank scheduled a final review. They wanted proof the shop could sustain the loan long term. I spent 3 straight days building projections, calling in favors from Chicago contacts, and drafting a detailed turnaround plan. Ethan reviewed every page remotely, his legal notes precise and supportive. "You're doing this, Aiden. Not because they need you, but because you choose to." His belief anchored me when doubt crept in. The night before the meeting, Dad found me in the garage office. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. "I know I said things I can't take back," he started. The words tumbled out haltingly. Regret for the night he'd thrown me out, shame for letting pride blind him, fear that he'd lost his son for good. I listened without interrupting, the old wound throbbing but no longer bleeding. When he finished, I simply said, "I'm still here, Dad. That's what matters now." He nodded once, eyes glistening, and walked away. It wasn't perfect healing, but it was a start. The bank approved the restructuring. The shop was safe. That evening the family gathered for dinner. Real dinner, not the tense meals of the past months. Mom cooked pot roast, Tyler laughed louder than he had in years, and Dad raised a glass to second chances. I felt the weight shift. For the first time, I wasn't the extra load. I was the one holding the line. Yet Ethan's absence gnawed at me. I kept our relationship hidden even as I rebuilt everything else. When he texted asking how the meeting went, I replied with facts but no emotion. His response was kind, but I could feel the distance growing. A few days later, a snowstorm stranded me at the shop after hours. I called Ethan, voice cracking for the first time. "I'm scared they'll reject me all over again if they know the full truth," I admitted. He was quiet for a long moment. "Then maybe it's time to trust that the man who saved them can also be loved openly." His words stayed with me through the drive home, headlights cutting through swirling flakes. The family I had carried was beginning to carry me back. I just needed the courage to let them see all of me. Spring brought new life to the shop and to our fractured relationships. We expanded into custom restorations, and I flew back and forth to Chicago twice a month to keep my own career alive. Ethan met me at the airport each time, steady and patient, never demanding more than I could give. Our evenings together became my sanctuary, quiet talks on his balcony, shared meals, the simple comfort of his hand in mine. He never pressured me about coming out to my family, but I felt the unspoken question every time I left again. The misunderstanding that nearly broke us arrived without warning. One weekend, Tyler visited Chicago for a college fair and stayed at my place. Ethan stopped by with takeout, and the three of us spent the evening laughing like old friends. Tyler noticed the easy way we moved around each other. Later, when Ethan had gone, my brother asked point blank, "Are you two together?" I froze. The old fear roared back. Instead of answering, I changed the subject. Tyler didn't push, but the next morning he said quietly, "You saved Dad's shop. You don't have to save everyone else's feelings at the cost of your own happiness." I carried that truth back to Ohio. Dad had started asking about my life in the city, small questions at first, then deeper ones. Mom already suspected. Her knowing glances told me so. Still, I hesitated. Then the crisis hit again. A major supplier threatened to pull out over an old dispute Dad had never resolved. The shop's momentum stalled overnight. I worked frantically from my laptop at the kitchen table, calling every contact I had. Ethan offered to fly in and handle the legal side in person. I said yes before I could overthink it. He arrived the next afternoon. Watching him shake Dad's hand and dive into contracts felt surreal. They worked side by side for hours, two men from completely different worlds united by the same goal. That night, after the supplier agreement was secured, Ethan and I walked the quiet streets. "Your family sees you now, Aiden," he said. "They just need to see the rest of you too." I stopped under a street lamp, heart hammering. "I love you," I told him, the words finally free. "And I'm tired of hiding that from them." He kissed my forehead, and for the first time I felt the burden truly lift. The next morning I gathered everyone in the living room. Dad, Mom, Tyler, three faces I had once believed would never accept me fully. "There's something I need you to know," I began. My voice shook, but it held. "Ethan isn't just a colleague. He's the man I love." The silence stretched only a moment. Mom smiled first, tears already falling. Tyler grinned like he'd known all along. Dad looked down at his hands, then up at me. "Took you long enough to say it," he muttered. Then he stood and clapped my shoulder, the same shoulder he once turned away from. "As long as he makes you happy, that's what matters." The room filled with something I hadn't felt in years, unconditional belonging. Summer unfolded like a second chance for all of us. The shop thrived with a new line of electric vehicle conversions I had pitched, drawing younger customers and steady revenue. Tyler came out to the family officially, and we celebrated together with a backyard barbecue where Ethan grilled burgers like he'd always belonged. Dad even asked Ethan for advice on retirement planning, the two of them talking engines and investments like old friends. I watched from the porch swing, heart full in a way I never imagined possible. Yet growth always demands one final test. A national chain offered to buy the shop at a price that would set my parents up for life. The offer tempted Dad. The stress of ownership had aged him. I spent weeks running the numbers, showing how we could expand independently and create something lasting for Tyler and future generations. Late nights turned tense. Dad worried I was pushing too hard because of my own past resentments. Ethan sensed the strain and gently reminded me, "You've already proven you're not a burden. Now let them choose their own path." The breaking point came during a family meeting. Dad announced he was leaning towards selling. I argued passionately, voice rising for the first time in years. Old wounds resurfaced, words about disappointment, about carrying too much. Mom stepped in, reminding us how far we had come. Tyler looked between us and said simply, "Aiden carried us when we needed it. Maybe now we carry him by trusting his vision." The room quieted. Dad stared at the offer letter, then at me. "You're right," he said at last. "We're not selling. This shop is our legacy, and you helped rebuild it." Relief washed over me like cool rain. That same night, Ethan and I sat on the dock by the lake where I used to skip stones as a kid. Fireflies danced above the water. "I almost lost you to my own fear," I admitted. He pulled me close. "You never lost me. You just needed to see that the man who saved his family could also be saved by love." We stayed there until the stars came out, talking about the future, maybe a house closer to both cities, maybe adopting a dog, maybe just more mornings like this one. The misunderstanding that had nearly divided us became the bridge that made us stronger. Back in Chicago the following week, I stood in my office overlooking the river and realized how much had shifted. The Aiden who once fled in shame now walked with purpose. Colleagues noticed the change. Even my boss commented on my renewed drive. I called home every Sunday now, conversations easy and full of laughter. The label burden had dissolved completely, replaced by something far more powerful, the knowledge that I had chosen to carry what mattered, and in doing so, found the strength to let others carry me too. Autumn returned, painting the Ohio hills in gold and crimson. The shop celebrated its best quarter ever, and we threw a community open house with live music and free oil changes. Dad stood at the entrance shaking hands, Mom handing out cookies, Tyler managing the raffle. Ethan and I arrived together, no more hiding. Neighbors who had whispered years ago now smiled and asked genuine questions. One older mechanic pulled me aside and said, "Kid, you turned this place around. Proud of you." The words landed soft, healing old scars I didn't even know were still there. On the last night of the celebration, after everyone had gone home, I walked the empty bays with Dad. Tools hung neatly, floors gleaming. "I was wrong, Aiden," he said without preamble. "Calling you a burden, that was fear talking. Fear of losing control, fear of what I didn't understand. You showed me what real strength looks like." I swallowed hard. "We both carried things we didn't have to," I replied. "But we made it." He hugged me then, awkward, brief, but real. The kind of hug that says more than any speech. Ethan waited outside, leaning against his car under the streetlights. I joined him, and we drove back to Chicago together, windows down, music low. Along the highway, I thought about the journey. The night I left home broken. The years of quiet success laced with loneliness. The return that forced me to face every fear. Somewhere between the cornfields and the city skyline, I had stopped proving my worth and started living it. Today the family group chat buzzes daily with photos, jokes, and plans for holidays. Tyler is thriving at college, openly dating and confident. Mom sends recipes and asks about Ethan's favorite meals. Dad forwards articles about electric cars and asks my opinion. The shop is expanding into a second location, and I consult remotely while building my own firm. Ethan and I just signed a lease on a place with a backyard big enough for the dog we're adopting next month. Life isn't perfect, no one's is, but it's ours, built on choices that once terrified me and now define me. Looking back, I realized the question that started everything wasn't just about pain. It was about possibility. The gay son branded a burden didn't just save his family. He saved himself too. And in the end, that's the real story worth carrying forward. Sometimes the heaviest labels we carry are the ones others place on us, but the greatest freedom comes when we choose to rewrite them. Aiden's journey reminds us that love, in all its forms, doesn't weaken us. It reveals the strength we already possess. If you're holding a secret that feels like a burden, remember, the family that once pushed you away may one day need the very heart they misunderstood. Trust the timing of your truth. Lean on those who see you fully. And never forget that the man who rises after falling becomes the one everyone else can lean on. Choose courage, choose connection, and watch how the weight you once carried turns into wings.